Hi, everyone, and welcome to the MLOps podcast. I'm your host, Dean, and today I have with me Han Lee. Han Lee is a machine learning engineer at a large financial company where he builds and deploys machine learning models for financial intelligence. And he is also very active on several community chat channels, Twitter, and has a lot of interesting opinions about machine learning, LLMs, and MLOps, which we'll be diving into today. So, Han, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me.
Much for having.
Awesome. So, I guess um, to start with a very high level question, how would you describe the state of NLP, natural language processing, and LLMs today?
I think with all the noise from the generative AI, ChatGPT space, we are having a resurgence of interest into natural language processing. It is not that it was not important before, but now we have a whole swarm of newcomers or newly interested people that wants to join the industry, fine tune their large language models or use large language model for their applications. So I think it's a very, very good change to get a insurgent of get a surge of new interest and new interest for the field.
Interesting. And can you maybe give an example or two of like where you think that we're maybe repeating the past but in a new flavor?
Yeah, it's fun because it's literally what is happening. Where when you have a lot of new players in the market and they try to speed run what has happened in the NLP and information retrieval or search engine space over the past 20 years. So initially, everyone goes like, "Hey, we need to use vector search, vector databases, this and that," and now gradually we are seeing people like people thinking, hey, what happens if I need to do certain type of search aggregation? What happens if I need to do certain type of um, uh, uh, filtering by
Hmm.
either filtering or boosting by timestamps or by categories? And then they look at a simple vector database and they think, doesn't really make sense. So they are trying to like find out a proper solution, which is using the search engine with the built-in capabilities and all sort of those things. And sometimes even in the model training field as well, where people were trying to overfit models to their evaluation data, and they claim, "Hey, we did really, really, really well on the evaluations." But when you really actually dive into it, there is not a proper trend test eval separations. Um, so we are observing a lot of those. So I'm observing a lot of those behaviors, which gradually people are learning on uh, on a more robust way of handling things.
Fair enough. I guess one point that you made about like vector databases and maybe classical databases, right, is that it's like a pincer movement. So I don't remember who said this to me the first time, but like when you're innovating in a space that has incumbents, even if the technology is totally new, then you're at a race to whether or not the newcomers can get to scale faster than the incumbents can get to innovation. And I think that what we're seeing right now is exactly that, which is that all of the, or not all, but a lot of the vector database companies are now developing classical database functionality, and all of the classical database solutions are developing vector database functionality. Like we're now looking into adding solutions for our own product, and one of the things that we realized is like Postgres has a vector DB extension, so you can basically bring that functionality to where you're already working. I'm curious if you had to make a bet today, who do you think would win? Like, do you think that vector DBs are here to stay as independent companies, or are they going to be replaced by all of the existing databases adding, these vector functionalities?
That is an interesting question. I mean, it depends. It really depends on your use case, and it really depends on the use case. So,
Hmm.
as an example, if you are trying to search for product categories, and perhaps you have some product descriptions in your existing Mongo or Cassandra database, then why the heck would you want to set up a separate vector database instead of using the vector search functionalities of those databases? Or if you are using Postgres already, why would you set up a separate vector database
Hmm.
to do what Postgres can do? And at the same time, if you are searching over a large amount of documents, like support documents or different knowledge bases that's built on top of Elasticsearch or OpenSearch or Vespa, then why the heck would you not just use that to control and handle your knowledge bases? And on a separate note, if your application needs to add memory to your chain or to your agent,
Hmm.
then you want something that's lightweight, something that's embeddable and easily maneuverable, instead of having a full blown stack of helm. You don't want to use a Helm chart to add memory to your large language models. So things
Sure.
like Quadrant or maybe Redis. Redis is still like you still need to use it's still a separate container usually,
Hmm.
or Chroma that can live in memory and that's built in the Python ecosystem with SQLite. Those works perfectly well in those use cases. So I think it depends on the use cases, and really hard to do data migration. So my expectation is if a company or if a project is already using Postgres, then the easiest, or if it's already using Elastic, then the most natural progression is to stay within the same data ecosystem as they did before, unless there is a special niche use case.
Yep, that makes sense. I think that maps to my intuition. I think we'll probably see some of the vector DB companies build out plugins or integrations into the classical database so that they can fit into the existing ecosystem and extend it with new functionality or with like the relative advantages they probably have in performance. But I agree with you that like data migration is probably the worst nightmare of most people that work with large scale data, and they'll try to avoid it at any cost, assuming
Right.
it's possible.
Yeah, I mean, if we look at some of the existing incumbents, the biggest one is probably Pinecone. And Pinecone
Hmm.
specifically mentioned that, hey, they integrate nicely with OpenSearch or Elasticsearch ecosystem. Right?
Hmm.
So they are aware where they are in the market and where they sit in the stack. And and back to the question of a search engine, one of the things that people will regularly do to maintain a search index is to reindex the search engine.
Yep.
And that reindexing time is usually non-trivial. It's non-trivial and it's not exactly easy, versus the actual search portion. So how to make that easy and fast and reliable,
Yep.
that is still somewhat of a unsolved problem for the newer large language model app entrant.
Fair enough. So talking about like LLMs, we basically just spent a few minutes explaining why they're in many senses more of the same. But obviously, anyone who's experienced working with an LLM knows that there is something unique and exciting about it. So what are you most excited about with regards to like LLMs now uh, in our lives?
Sure. So I think opinion, it's basically magic, right? It's basically magic. We have been, or at least I have been training language models for many years now. And back in the day, it was training Shakespeare and had it generate something similar to Shakespeare or tell some jokes. And now with the strength of GPT-4s and the rest of the even open source, open weight models like Llama 2 or Mistral, the capabilities are getting at the Turing test, like in my opinion. They are if they are basically already AGI level, or at least human level, maybe not connections, but human level type of speaking or writing
Hmm.
ability. So they are already there. And it brings up a lot of very interesting functionality that we previously couldn't done.
Okay.
Things like using LLM or using language as the medium to communicate between different components.
Hmm.
Using natural language to communicate between different components and getting this interconnected, using the language model to do some sort of planning, even though it's not exactly doing a very good job at the moment, but using it to do certain type of planning or and we can also fine tune to help them um, to be better in those regards, right? So like helping do planning, do some of the longer term, longer horizon type of generation, and also using language models to do evaluations on NLP tasks. That I think
Okay.
that those are some of the major breakthroughs that we couldn't done before, right? So like 2 years ago, when we evaluate summarizations, we're looking at things like blue score, rogue score, and when we do question answering, we're using things like exact match. None of
Hmm.
those make any sense, and every single one of those doesn't have is not a good indicator of how good the quality of the answer is. Like it doesn't tell you how great the summarization is, or is the summarization missing anything here and there. But nowadays we have it's fairly common now to use GPT-4 as a judge to ask it questions. Hey, given this passage and this reference packet passage, can you rank it from 0 to 1 or 0 to 3 of how good it is? And we can get a fairly consistent answer versus human labelers. So I think there are a lot of workflow improvements in those regards.
Fair enough. So if I'm a listener to this episode and I'm convinced, right? I think at this point most people are convinced about LLMs in some sense. I'm not sure people can then translate what they're convinced about into like an application, right? So if I'm thinking like, okay, I have to get into this LLM stuff, I need to figure out how this can impact my business or my product or something like that. How do you think about evaluating the advantages of disadvantages of using LLMs in real applications?
That's a very good question. I think in terms of the app development at this current state, there are certain fairly applications that people can build right away.
Hmm.
So some of that is just another chatbot, right? Chat with your own data, chat with your support document data, blah blah blah. That chat, those would be fairly defensive applications where I would expect everyone would have it within
Hmm.
the next year or two, and it's going to be so common that it's going to be no one's going to get any edge of those bots.
Sure.
So that's the first. And then there might be some more innovative opportunity
Hmm.
in building large language model applications. So things that might change the world are companies like Character AI, where they have role playing bots that really connect with people and really wins over people's attention and time for
Hmm.
a longer horizon. And on the more maybe commercial side of things, there could be different agents producing different works. So in the old days, we talk about, hey, we buy software and then, in the old days, and then over the past 20 years or so, we start to deliver software as a service. So we deliver software over the internet. And
Hmm.
with large language models and the agents, now we have the opportunity to deliver service as a software. So instead of going to travel website to click and research and find the perfect flight, car, blah, 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 etc., ask the travel agent, like again, back in the old days, you call up the agent, hey, I want to plan a trip to, let's say, Egypt. uh,
Mhm.
to see the pyramids, and the agent will plan out a list, perhaps an itinerary, travel planning. Perhaps it will ask you for some clarifications, and it will we can literally now provide the service using a large language model, using the agent built on top of like large language models. So I think that's one of the game changers that will happen. Uh, it's not happening perhaps now, but it's going to happen. And the other thing is this concept of internet. So we have perhaps Internet of Things that was a trending topic over the past decade or so. Maybe over the next decade, it could be a Internet of Agents, where agents might be communicating with other agents um, to solve some problems or to serve some problem for users.
I love that. First, admittedly, this is the first time I hear the service as a software thing. I love that. I'm definitely going to be stealing that and using this in future conversations. I think that's great, and that makes a lot of sense. I think that I don't know if you obviously we didn't coordinate this beforehand, but what I did over the weekend is I'm actually traveling with my family to Japan in April. And what I did over the weekend is I used GPT and ChatGPT to help me plan because I think that what, for me at least right now, the biggest solution that working with LLMs provides is avoiding the blank slate problem where you have a task and everything is just a blank slate and you have no idea where to start. So building out that scaffolding is really painful and you usually need to stare at that paper for a long time. And what GPT does for me is just like fill in the scaffolding and then I need to think. Like it doesn't solve thinking for me, but it definitely solves the hard work of figuring out like what I want to start with. And then I need to iterate. And also it's funny because one of the benefits of, or one of the changes as I understand them of, how they trained ChatGPT, right, is RLHF. And the idea behind that is that it's much easier to show someone two options and ask them like which one is better than it is to say rank this option, like how good is it, give me a rating on my pros or something like that. And I think that's what I'm basically using the LLM to do exactly that. Like show me an option, I'll tell you what's wrong with it, but it's much easier when you have something to look at. So I think that the generalization of that, going back to your point, is that if you can help people by showing them a basic option for something that they want, and then they can very easily give feedback and the product can change according to their feedback, then you get a really good experience for a lot of things that you had to have a human do in the past. So I think that that's sort of the magic. This is how I'm trying to put the magic into words. I don't know if that resonates with what you're seeing as well.
It does, it does, it does, it does. Like there's also certain type of or hallucinations or fallacies in that, where in terms of going back to the good old days of machine learning, and we think in terms of data distributions.
Mm-hmm.
There are probably a whole lot more data, written text on travel planning, on recipes, and perhaps home improvements, but that's travel planning, recipe, et cetera, et cetera. Right. So
Mm-hmm.
using ChatGPT or large language models for those tasks, it's perfect
Mm-hmm.
because there
Yep.
is a lot of it, because those are literally the data with the most frequency. But
Sure.
using large language model to plan for more esoteric tasks
Mm-hmm.
might be slightly more challenging, um, especially for tasks that changes quite often, right? So that's say, for example, how to use, using ChatGPT to solve some of the networking issues, some of the Docker Compose or Kubernetes issues. Those gets fairly hairy because
Mm-hmm.
it because that changed too fast.
Yep.
And and the other thing you brought up that's very interesting is it's lot of this is how well designed those apps are, right? So in ChatGPT, when GPT-4, but specifically ChatGPT, when you don't like an answer and you click thumbs down, I think they will pop up a separate answer for you to choose, like which one is better.
Hmm.
And in Google Bard, you do something similar. Sometimes it generates two answers in parallel for you. Sometimes when you click, when you resubmit a question, it will try to generate two things, right? So
Yes.
those preference data is extraordinarily helpful.
Yep.
So,
Yeah.
but at the same time, yeah, please.
Go ahead. Sorry.
But at the same time, like if answer might be boilerplate and boring, right? It's like reading Yelp reviews. It becomes somewhat mechanical. So like, I don't know, maybe you talk like ChatGPT could be a something that's offensive to people in a few years.
Yeah, that's true, and I did notice. It's actually a story that I'm not sure if I can share live, but I did notice that when someone is literally like reading out GPT responses to you, then like very quickly realize that something is wrong, and like uh the things that are being said could not reasonably be generated by a human. So like I still think that there's something that is very hard to explain exactly what it is, but it's very clear to a human what is like human output versus GPT generated
Right.
output. That might change in the near future. I don't know, but I still think that there's like it's not very hard to discriminate between uh, like AI generated and human generated text in many cases, assuming the conversation is long enough, right?
Right.
But I guess one question that I have, if we bring this back to deploying applications that are based or using LLMs, like how do like if I'm doing this, how do I select the right LLM for a given application?
That's a very, very good question. It depends on factors, on the the specific regulatory requirements, industries, etc. But let's say if we start from a blank slate,
Hmm.
just use GPT-4. I think there's
Okay.
the cost of inference has been driven down to basically nothing, or at least very, very cheap across all of the model vendors or suppliers,
Hmm.
service providers. And um, if let's say if we speak from a startup type of like perspective or a new
Sure.
product perspective, instead of iterating on the models, you'll be better to iterate on the product side to make sure to find the PNF before find the PNS, make sure there is certain type of data flywheels before think we need to swap out in and out different models for this purpose.
Hmm.
Otherwise, there are maybe not infinite, but there are way too many models out there on the market at the moment. Uh, Not just the open source or closed source proprietary vendors, but there are also a whole lot of fine-tuned models, things like the Dolphin models, which speaks somewhat uncensored. There's the news research models, like Hermes models.
Hmm.
There's a lot of very, very good models out there, but that becomes a model. You don't want to go into the model evaluation game, right? Like
Hmm.
if I need to buy a car for commute, whatever that's more, has a good fuel economy for the range I need, and just buy it instead of spending hours, or not, maybe not hours, spending money trying to research for a new car. Right.
Sure.
So like I want to get the tool that you have to build the things that you want versus evaluating the tools. The job is to build a new product not to evaluate all these different models to say, hey, this is better, that is better. Sure, it's better, but how much, uh, what's the impact of switching out this and that model that would that would contribute to your top or bottom line?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think that I'm curious to hear your thoughts about this as well. But I think that there's like this two split personality in the world of ML right now, where if you go to LinkedIn or Twitter, a lot of people spend a lot of time talking about like, oh, this new model is almost as good as GPT-4 and this specific benchmark and things like that. But if I sort of take what you're saying, which again I totally agree with, for the first iteration or first few iterations of every product, like you'd be better off choosing the thing that is best. Almost like everyone agrees basically that GPT-4 right now is the best there is. It is also very easy to access, maybe with the asterisk of I looked, for example, just for a project that we're working on, I looked at the GPT-4 Vision API limits, and I know that's still experimental and everything, but you get like 100 requests per day, which is super low. So if you need to
Right.
manage like a slightly bigger scale than that, then you're already in the world of we need to find hacks around this or something like that. I think maybe Azure has a slightly bigger limitation, but not like orders of magnitude better. And so you might hit those, but I think that for most products, as you say, that's not going to be the limitation in the beginning. And what you actually need to figure out is something that works well and gets value created. And then you can figure out later, after you maybe raised a few rounds and you have a bit of spare time and spare hands, you can figure out like what makes most sense. But I guess why do you think people focus on the like leaderboard metrics as much, and do they matter, or when do they matter?
Unless you are a model provider, it doesn't really matter. As a
Okay.
model consumer, if you cannot find PMF, if you cannot find product market fit using GPT-4, chances of you finding product market fit using Llama 2 or Mixtrail, zip.
I love that. That's
It's not going to solve your problem. Like, it's similar to playing golf too. Like I play golf, and hey, there's a new set of club from Callaway, and it's advertised to do like all this crazy stuff. It's not going to make me Tiger Woods, right?
fair
So
enough.
there's the tool, and there's a tool of the trade that we could use, but that those are not going to solve actual skill issues or the actual
Hmm.
PMF issues. And there are a lot of interest on the board from communities where either their KPIs or their revenues are hard tied to the leaderboard. So, for
Hmm.
example, OpenAI, even though they are sitting on the top right now, it's I think GPT-4 was finished training in 2022, right?
Yeah,
So
probably.
so the tight to that number one spot, but it's
Hmm.
not easy because there is a whole lot of effort, other important um, organizations going for them, right? So let's say, for example, if you so it all comes down to the incentive. Mixtrail has the incentive of being at the top spot, being the top
Sure.
dog in the game. Um, Facebook or Meta has that incentive as well from Zuckerberg. It's one of their strategic directions. Uh,
Hmm.
and some other smaller companies or startup firms that it's also in their interest to be on the top, to advertise that, hey, we are different, we are better, so they can get attention. So for their revenue opportunities or funding opportunities. So the incentives decide where they focus their energies on. And then there is a whole lot of, let's just call them influencers for a lack of a better word. on the AI ML side, where they are selling content to grab attention. So they will promote every single type of content, every single paper out there. Some of them get paid calls to advertise for certain services, right? So the whole ecosystem devolves into leaderboard chasing, not too dissimilar to, that's a Kaggle leaderboards, which is a lot, which, both are legit. It deviates one from the actual problem that we need to solve using machine learning or using large language models is, you know, what services can we provide that we couldn't before? What are the revenue opportunities? And and how do we make the process more efficient? What are the cost saving opportunities, et cetera, et cetera. So those are the valuable problems that we need to solve
Hmm.
instead of being on top of the leaderboard or getting number one on Kaggle large language model uh, detection problem, which is that one was just fun to watch.
I think that the term for this is Goodhart's law, right? Where when you define a metric, it stops being a good metric because people optimize for the metric and not the actual value that it's supposed to represent. But I do have one, like, maybe follow up question to that is, what if I'm listening to this and I hear what you're saying, but my thoughts are like, oh, I just actually got off a call with a company that works with medical data. Like, they can't use GPT right now, or at least they can't easily use GPT without going through a very painful process that involves their company's lawyers and things like that. Like, what do I do in those cases? Like, I can't use a model that's not hosted by me. And let's say we're not talking about giant companies that have the, I think OpenAI said it's like a $2 million commitment to develop your own GPT. So let's say I don't have that budget yet. How do they approach this?
I think that the process will be largely the same.
Okay.
Either you have to go through the legal and compliance requirements and the security requirements to use uh, OpenAI, to have a contract with OpenAI and try to fine tune on their models, or trying to do the same with Google Cloud if you can go on cloud, or even if you use open source models, there are going to be questions, right? Is this model
Mm-hmm.
legit? So is this model legit? How much can we trust the model? Does the model understand our own data, et cetera, et cetera? The question doesn't deviate. That doesn't go away because you use one service or you use or self-host a model. And I think realistically speaking, self-hosting a model is not exactly very economical task at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, what we're seeing is the large language model API service cost is being highly subsidized by all the VC money or by NVIDIA with their GPUs. So it's approaching basically free unless you
Mm-hmm.
have huge amount of value.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, if you try to self-host, let's say a Llama 2 model on a A100 cluster, you can purchase that's going to be like 100, 150, $200,000. And then, or you can spin up on AWS, which costs you, I don't know, $20,000 per month
Yeah.
to do some inference. Your per token cost is going to skyrocket.
Mm-hmm.
So the unit economics is not there if you want to self-host. And the compliance red tape is going to be fairly similar or the same, where people are going to question the same thing. And um, you end up needing to defend yourself, saying, we need to use Llama 2 because it's better than GPT-4 or it's safer than GPT-4. That's not going to be a fun conversation to have. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So uh, I used to work at buy side, and we used to joke nobody gets fired if they become an Apple
Yeah.
as a investment, right? Or if they
Hmm.
become a Berkshire
Sure.
Hathaway as a investment, right? So there are like safe industry leading options. There could be alternative options that people could use, and if you need, unless you work for some companies that's more advanced or has a lot more freedom, then sure, you can use whatever, Llama 2 or even T5. T5's, the T5 models, the Palm T5 models from Google, they are very, very solid. They work well. They are not large, but they work really well if your if your scope is limited.
Fair enough. And then one last question about this is, I know at least one listener that's like working on their own LLM. So if I'm an LLM creator, as we discussed earlier, it sounds like from what you're saying that I'm going to have a hard uphill battle combating with, the open AIs of the world, maybe the Mistrals of the world, the Googles. What do you think I could offer potential users that would make me stand out and actually be valuable? Like if I want people to use my LLM in the real world in products.
That is a very good question, and I don't know.
Okay.
So old days, well, ChatGPT, people say data is the new oil,
Hmm.
and some companies are data companies, and their data is their most valuable asset.
Hmm.
And a language model is nothing but a condensation of the data in time.
Hmm.
So when we train a language model, we basically take all this unstructured, maybe semi-structured text data and condense and save them into the language model.
Hmm.
So if any company believes data most important asset and data is the product, then your large language model is your product. It's not the prompt around it. It might be the interface around it, but the core is in the model. The model is the
Hmm.
product, right? Like I think OpenAI said the same thing for them because they sell models. But for any company that sell data or that provide data services, then the data is the model.
Hmm.
The data is the model, and the model becomes your product. So that holds true in that sense. So maybe as a model or evaluator, they might not be there yet. There might not be a whole lot of interest yet, but who knows what's going to happen in the future and how this industry is going to evolve. So
Yeah,
let's
that's
say if we want to have a uh, agent representing a travel agency, then way to make that work, sure, you can prompt GPT-4 as much as you like, or you can prompt any other uh, Gemini Pro as much as you like to have it behave the same way. But it's not going to be the same versus training on all the past interactions, conversations, histories, and then and embed those data or train those knowledge into the parametric memories of your large language model.
yeah, like that's a really good point. That like when you said that, it got me thinking that the one good example sort of that I can think of in this vein is like Midjourney, where I feel like everyone is doing their thing and fighting over who's going to be like beat GPT-4, but Midjourney like focused on a very like you can say a niche within the market, right, which is just image generation and making images that look really beautiful. And they had a horrible like I maybe this is I hope that doesn't offend anyone. But they had like a really inconvenient user experience, right? Where you had to do everything through a Discord chat, and the product was so good, like the model was so good that no one cared about the user experience being suboptimal. And I think that maybe what you're saying is that if you're an LLM builder and you're trying to figure out like where your relative advantage could be, and if you can figure out like a subset of the market where having dedicated data doesn't solve the problem just for one company, but could solve the problem for a category of companies, then maybe you can say like, oh, ChatGPT is the best solution for generic data. But if you want specifically marketing and sales LLMs, then I'm the best, right? And that would be much more interesting. And I would actually be interested to hear if there are evaluation metrics that look at specific subsets of data types and seeing how models perform there. Like, is there an LLM that's much better for medical data or financial data or whatever? That would be interesting, and I don't think I've seen that anywhere.
I think technically speaking, at least Google published a paper called FinPalm, not FinPalm, MapPalm.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Yeah.
MapPalm, I think that was last year or the year before. And I think there is also Bloomberg GPT, which is still like those. There are paper published
Mm-hmm.
regarding like some of this highly censored or highly regulated industries. I'm not sure if anyone have any dedicated GPT in or large language models in production there. There are definitely like Midjourney is a good example. The other one is Athlon. Athlon, I
Mm-hmm.
forgot how to pronounce their name, where they specialize in generating anime type of
Mm-hmm.
images, right? They fine tune on I think if I remember correctly, there were some scandals, but I think I remember if I remember correctly, they fine tune on stable diffusion. It worked
Mm-hmm.
extraordinarily well, and so those domain specific are there, right? And
Mm-hmm.
there are also that's I think um, what's that company in China? EYI.
Mm-hmm.
So they also train, I believe they train from the ground up, but they use Llama's architecture and their own data to train everything. So that also works. So I mean, if we think about domain specific, uh, we can slice up the domains by many facets. Let's
Mm-hmm.
say, for example, if there is a Chinese or a language model that understands Chinese,
Mm-hmm.
or understands uh, Arabic or English or Hindu. Those
Mm-hmm.
are those are also specific domains
Sure.
because a lot of the current language models outside of perhaps GPT-4 and Claude or perhaps Gemini, uh, the open source models, they are not multilingual.
Yeah.
Sure, I mean, if you consider speaking Spanish and Italian are Spanish and Italian are very distant languages, but in reality, most of the Western European languages are fairly close to each other
Sure.
in terms of semantics, in terms of the way it's spelled. But if we take, let's say, mixture and ask it uh, some questions in Japanese, it's going to fail horribly. Or it's
Yeah.
asking, it's once we cross certain, I guess, national boundaries or racial boundaries, then the language becomes very different. The understanding becomes different too. So, like back uh, last year, when ChatGPT just came out, you could
Mm-hmm.
literally get different answers different answers ask using different answers for the same question using different languages.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that,
Familiar with that.
yeah, so that's interesting too, right? So a lot of these open source models are not multilingual, and that's
Yeah.
knowing a new language is a new domain.
I agree. I think that um, in a sense, the as technology moves forward, that creates a stronger incentive for people that don't speak what currently is the main language for most of technology, which is English. It creates an incentive for people to be better at English because it gives them access to better technology. But assuming we get to the threat to like cross the threshold where you have good models for different languages, then maybe that equalizes everything again. And I know like so I speak Hebrew. I know that there is a team in Israel that's trying to train like a large language model that specializes in Hebrew. As far as I know, that's like something that's under like within going through training right now. So it'll be interesting to see when it comes out how good it is and how it compares to GPT-4, which I when GPT-4 came out, it had the like the iPhone app has the voice communication, so you can like speak to it, and they use Whisper and everything. And one of the things that was interesting is I was showing this to a friend, and he was speaking in Hebrew, but the like the transcription figured out what he was saying in Hebrew, and then GPT answered in English like correctly. So it didn't try to answer in Hebrew, but it understood the conversation and it answered the right answer to that question. So it's really interesting to see how technology and languages are going to play moving into the future.
Right,
Um,
right. And even like if we speak about Hebrew, that if I remember correctly, I don't speak Hebrew, but if I remember correctly, Hebrew also writes from right to left,
yes, that's true.
the opposite side of English, right? And
Yes.
in a lot of uh, Chinese or East Asian languages, we also write from right to left, and
Hmm.
that that becomes an interesting problem to solve because autoregressive usually means we generate from left to right. So how do you train those models and how do you reorganize the characters so it makes sense to the end users?
Yes.
That would be an interesting challenge. And then there's the other thing about like how do we encode these characters, right?
Yep.
Because if we encode based on bits or bytes, then it is the same. But if we encode using encodings like UTF-8, then
Hmm.
not every single character has the same length due to the encoding.
Yes.
So, uh, so I believe there was a paper that talked about how uh, I forgot the name of the language, but the language they speak in Myanmar or in Burma,
Hmm.
um, it the same amount of characters, their words are going to take up a lot more tokens because how it's encoded.
Interesting.
So
Yeah.
there are all these more fundamental problems outside of on the tokenizing layer that we need to solve versus the actual language model. Like, hey, just shut everything to a transformers, maybe with different like flash attention or you know et cetera, or like those optimizations versus on the tokenization layer, how we actually tokenize.
Sure. Yeah, I think that that's it's going to be very interesting to see how these things develop because of the variation in like language and culture and all of those things. And but still, we're trying to develop something that's pretty generic, right? Like that's the G and AGI. So it'll be interesting to see like how those things coincide and what we get first. I want to take a few moments to ask maybe about like obviously we've been talking about LLMs and that's super interesting to everyone right now. But if we take a step back, right, like LLMs are in my mind a subset of machine learning. I think in most people's minds, and I'm curious to hear how you think about like MLOps as the sort of approach of deploying or getting ML applications into production. If you can share a few of your thoughts on that topic as well.
So I have a lot of opinions on that. Uh, you don't need ML ops, you don't need LLM ops. If your prompt is embedded or it is embedded as part of the code, as part of your
Hmm.
code, it's already checked in. So you can just go through this typical uh, software development lifecycle practices, and it's going to get you somewhere. And 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 once you have something in production, you are doing ops. So what I don't see, like especially now with larger language models, if we are not, if you're not specifically serving the large language model, that all the current APIs provides a very clear segregation of responsibilities, that your large language model applications no longer depends on the whole machine learning model serving side.
Hmm.
So you don't need anything that's unique or special for the large language model application. Now,
Fair enough.
so you don't need like anything that's, prompt tuning, prompt monitoring, etc., etc. Perhaps, yes, we do need you. One thing you will need is if you're exposing your large language model directly to a user
Hmm.
via a chat interface. It's the
Sure.
type of highest risk type of model, type of application, because you're
Hmm.
exposing your model directly, which means it's going to be prone to distillations. It's going to it's prone to different prompt attacks, right?
Hmm.
So those specifically are a danger. So you do need certain cybersecurity requirements to safeguard against those. So that's on the large language model application side. On the machine learning application side, um, it's the same applies. So, let's say, for example, for support documents, there might be certain metric for support chatbot. There might be certain metric you define, a certain business metric you define that you want to optimize.
Hmm.
So then it's how do you optimize for those metrics, and how do you build the data pipeline or data feedback loop to ensure that your model is functioning or it's providing the value add it's advertised. So
Fair enough.
so it's well segregated into two problems. So large language models, you don't really need that much ops tools. But on the machine learning model side, on the application doesn't need that many ops. But on the
Hmm.
actual large language model or machine learning models, you do need the ops. I think we do need to have some ideas or some logging or data pipeline to extract and to refine a lot of perhaps the user prompts or the preference data collected, right? So circling back to the prior example of in ChatGPT, where when you click a thumbs down, it will show a separate output and ask you which one is better, or both are bad, right? So those preference data has to be saved and recorded
Hmm.
somewhere. So as long as your application has some of this data feedback loop designed to build up the fly side, the flywheel per se,
Hmm.
data flywheel. If you have that, you're fine, and you can figure out if you really need to fine tune your large language model every other day or every other quarter, right?
Yeah.
That's a separate question. It's definitely not going to be as high a frequency versus some recommendation engines that just get regularly trained on a hourly or you know daily basis.
Yeah.
Nobody
No,
has
I
the
agree.
budget to train that for large language models, and it's not going to take that. It's not going to be that fast. And the
No.
value add of having that is the value add of having fresh interaction data. That's not high, in my opinion.
Hmm. I agree. I think that the like you said it in a very like clear way, so I don't want to take away from that. I think that the way that I think about this is, in a sense, where we're at right now is that all of MLOps is being condensed into this data flywheel, right? Like you basically build the first version, and that might be hacky, and you get to production. The goal is to move as fast as possible, as you say, to find PMF. But then the second step is, how can you automate this process enough so that you can improve your model based on the new data that you get because you found PMF and we now have a lot of users using your product. So you get more data and you want to solve for that. And specifically, one use case is solving for edge cases, because you're probably in that first iteration, you're going to solve for the main case. But as more people use your product, you're going to find more problems with it. And then you want to make sure that your model performs well on that. And you need that data flywheel in order to do that. So I think that there's a lot of a lot of overlap there, and that makes a lot of sense to me as well.
I think maybe it's not solving the edge case, right? I think like if we circle back to the mid-journey example,
Hmm.
uh, they didn't solve the edge case. They doubled down on their main use case,
Sure,
ignore
fair enough.
ignore the edge case, and they found their local minima, and that's a very
Hmm.
lucrative minima as well for their services. Right?
Yep.
So you unless you are OpenAI or Google DeepMind or Mixtrail,
Hmm.
you don't need to solve for every single edge case. And
Yeah.
and that simplifies the problem. So instead of figuring out how to solve or use edge case, how to double down on the cases that's generating revenue or profit, I think that would be more interesting. Um, to me, to be for it. Yeah, it's not exactly Tesla. Even for Tesla or a lot of the self-driving car companies, they are right now over optimizing for their current deployments, which is, I guess, San Francisco or San Francisco Bay Area. But if you take those
Hmm.
cars and try to make it self-drive in Alberta or in Edmonton, Canada, or in Tokyo, it's probably
Yeah.
not going to work that well, right? But
Yep.
if they can get enough traction and revenue in a selective area, then just double down on that instead of
Hmm.
trying to solve everything and put a guardrail.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Make sure it's not dangerous in the places where it fails.
correct.
That's an important takeaway, I think, for everyone here. Um, we're close to wrapping up. I want to ask you a few shorter questions that
Sure.
are even higher level than the ones that I already have. One is, what do you think right now is the hardest unsolved problem in the machine learning and AI space?
Data. How do
Okay.
we? How the hardest problem is still data, because
Hmm.
on the machine learning side we learn from data. So how
Hmm.
do we generate higher quality data, larger amount of data? How do we curate that? That is still an unsolved problem. We managed to do a lot of magic using self-supervised learning, large language models, and we managed to do a lot of magic utilizing uh, images on the internet with a lot of metadata attached. So that solved a lot of the labeling problem on the image generation side or text generation side. But going forward, how can we extend this to the other domains? Right. So I think Google published the paper Alpha Geometry. They literally
Hmm.
wrote a solving engine to filter out generated data that doesn't make sense. But that is, or in terms of code generation, we could use interpreter or code compiler to filter out code that doesn't work as a
Hmm.
quality filter. But that is not going to have that. I don't think we have such a solution for a lot of the other domains.
Yeah.
So, so data is still going to be the problem on how can we scale that up. And the other problem is how can we use either machine learning or other AI methods to make to do proper planning and reasoning, to do better planning and reasoning, and the thought process and logic. Those are still hard problems.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. And then maybe the flip side of that is, this space is moving so fast, right? And I used to ask for predictions for a long time into the future, but now I shortened the time horizon. So where do you think we're going to be a year from now? Like, what are your predictions for the space?
Well, there are easy predictions and there are hard predictions. There's going to be GPT-5 or some variation thereof. There's going to be Llama 3 or some variation of thereof. The model are going to get bigger, perhaps. The models are going to get better.
Hmm.
perhaps smaller. Um, old models are going to become the new small language models in the future. Um, and I think one of the focus will be that on the industry side, people will step back and think, okay, we build some application on large language model using large language models, support bot, chatbot, etc. Now what? Like, how much
Hmm.
does it add? Like, some of the companies, a lot of companies would that's trying to adopt large language models also will need to step back and figure out if this actually contributes to shareholder values. Does this add to my ROI? What's my ROI in this? Um,
Hmm.
where's the ROI? Does it actually make my business better? Does it really actually generate sales? Uh, it's not too dissimilar on the startup space. Once you have enough funding, you have PNF, you found PMF, and the question is, how does this help us? How do they help their customers in generating more value or solve
Yep.
like some business problems?
I very much agree with that. I guess one small question: do you think that GPT-5 is going to be? You mentioned that to you, a lot of the things that we're already seeing is kind of like AGI, at least for text. Do you think we're going to see actual AGI by most people's definition in the next year, or is it going to take longer than that?
No, I think we already, I think we already have it. I mean, like, uh, the amount of things that ChatGPT could do on my iPhone, fairly, it's already impressive.
Hmm.
So we already have it. It's just how more people are going to use, how more people will be made aware of the capabilities that we have right now. I think that there's still a big chasm, right? Like, if I go to, let's say, a hiking trip or a random bar somewhere in California outside of Bay Area, people don't just talk to each other about, hey, ChatGPT, hey, my latest language model, right? So we're in this little bubble of in the tech world where we everything we talk about is generative AI or ChatGPT, but there's a lot of uh, untapped uh, ingenuities from other parts of the world or other demographics. They will bring in new, uh, fresh new ideas, and I believe that it's similar to how ChatGPT made these industries kind of sexy again, and we have a bunch of new entrants trying to develop new things and trying to invent things, or trying to reinvent things, and I think those are awesome. And we need more of that just so we can revisit and question our assumptions and question, why are we doing this way?
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. So I think that's a really nice sort of picture to end with. So the last question I have for you is recommendations that you have for the audience. It doesn't have to be data science or machine learning related, and also where can they find you if they want to follow and hear more from you.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. So second question first, you can find me on Twitter or find me on LinkedIn. Um, I am open to messages. Um, and one recommendation is prioritize and focus and eliminate a lot of the noises. I think right now, at least for me, right now we are in a information overload uh, type of phase. Like back when I was a kid, that's many decades ago, uh, we have to actively go out and find entertainment or find things to occupy our time with. And nowadays,
Hmm.
you get one TikTok video you can just swipe down on TikTok or I don't know left or right or like YouTube Shorts. There's just so much
Hmm.
information out there. So filtering out and prioritizing becomes a lot more important. nowadays, even more important than before. So try to stay away from the noise and focus.
That's a great recommendation to end on. I wonder if LLMs will help us or hurt us in doing that. We can hope that they help.
Yes.
Awesome. So, Han, thank you so much for taking the time today. This was a real pleasure. Um,
No, thank
and
you. Thank you for having me. It's a fun conversation.
Awesome. So until next time, and thank you to the audience. I'll see you next time. Bye bye. Thank you for listening to the MLOps podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please like the video or subscribe. If you have any feedback, leave a comment below. Thanks again for listening, and see you next time.